Hey guys, I am here today to talk to you about how to write your final paper for the course, which is your research paper. And I'm happy to tell you that if you did a good job on your annotated bibliography, you are a good portion of the way done right now before you've even seen the assignment sheet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the assignment sheet that you're going to be using as your guideline for this project. And then I will show you a model paper that I wrote using these guidelines and talk you through the process of how I did this. Okay, so for this paper, what you're going to do is you're going to take the story that you analyzed, you chose to research, and you're going to have a paper that is broken up into 4 sections. Okay, so your first section is an introduction. And in that introduction, you talk about the story. You summarize the story. It's a very general look at the story. And then you create a thesis, which is basically an expression of whether or not you think the story's main themes are relevant in today's world. In this section, you don't have to cite anything. This is an overview. You'll have no citations, no quotes from the story, no quotes from research, just your own ideas. In the second section, you're going to talk about historical context. This section will be minimum of 500 words. And in this section, you're going to provide citations from at least 2 credible academic sources, but these do not have to be peer-reviewed articles. So think about your annotated bibliography. You collected sources like that. You may and probably should include some quotes from the primary source, the story. But what you're basically doing is talking about the author's background or the literary movements or information about the time period in which the story was written that would seem relevant to your interpretation of the story. The third section of your paper is your interpretation of the story. And in this section, you will only use citations from the primary source. You're not going to use any research information in this part. This is strictly your own analysis of the story and looking at how specific elements of fiction like language, setting, tone, point of view, characterization, or conflict relate to other ideas in your paper. And there are many different ways that you could approach that. In your conclusion, you think about the real world application, the real world relevance of ideas from the story. And this is where you're going to include citations from your scholarly peer-reviewed journal article and multiple citations from your primary source. Okay, so let me show you an example paper. It's got a few things I want you to notice. First of all, here is the top part of my first page of my model paper. And I have my regular heading, my header, all that MLA stuff, and a title. In my title, I hint at the direction of my paper, the story of an hour. What does it mean to be free? For each section, I've created a heading, a section heading. And what MLA suggests is that you have smaller font and different font from what the rest of your text is. So I have chosen sort of a traditional route, 10-point Times New Roman font in all caps. So I have my section and it's titled Introduction. In my introduction, I am primarily just summarizing the story. And then in the last section of it, I state my thesis. And my thesis is that central themes of the story of an hour are just as relevant today as they were when the story was first published. My second section is author bio, and Kate Chopin's life has a lot of overlap and importance in the story and the themes of the story. So one thing I want you to notice as I've done this is how much of my annotated bibliography writing I was able to use as I created this section. So if I go to my annotated bibliography, my section about naturalism, if you read it and you look at that compared to my paper, it is almost identical. I wrote this is my annotated bibliography. I've got express permission from my professor to use this same exact wording in my final project. So we go here, I added a transition sentence, a topic sentence. So my annotated bibliography started right here. Naturalism, a subset of realism, is a literary movement largely focused on the powerlessness of humans in the face of the natural world. Look at my annotated bibliography, exactly the same. I did add a topic sentence. How does that relate to my paper though? So I don't want to just paste it in there and be done with it. I had to kind of work it into my paper. So Kate Chopin is considered to be a naturalist writer. And then the definition of naturalism that I had from my annotated bibliography. And then some discussion of the story. I transitioned and added some information about how this is also evident in the story of an hour in the next section. And then here in this section, I added the author bio, which is also from my annotated bibliography. So if you look at my annotated bibliography, flipping back to that, the biography of Kate Chopin, this information is almost exactly, again, copied and pasted into my paper. But I did take out some sentences that didn't seem relevant in this new project. I focused it a little bit more and I added a little bit more detail that made it more closely fit to what I was trying to do in this section, which was to discuss Kate Chopin as a naturalist writer and define what naturalism is and bring in just a little bit of how that's evident in the story of an hour. The next section, if you recall, is where I'm going to do my own interpretation of the story without any secondary sources cited. So what I chose to do is to analyze aspects of the story of an hour which are naturalist in style. So I particularly discussed the narrative commentary on her perception of the environment. So sort of looking at symbols and how the narrative commentary uses the nature as a symbol, and also characterization of the main character, Louise Mallard, to support my argument that this is indeed a naturalist text. In my final section, in my conclusion, I brought in the third entry from my annotated bibliography, which was in particular a discussion of freedom of choice in terms of the feminist movement, or feminist movements, and looking in particular about how that's evident in another text, which is a television series called Alias. So that seems like a little bit of a stretch, right? So I had to do quite a bit of work to kind of bring that around and make that all tie together. This was certainly the most challenging section for me to write, but I'm happy with the way it turned out. Again, I was able to use almost verbatim my writing from the annotated bibliography and just put it in here, but I did have to use some tricks in order to weave it in and to make it fit, a few changes in order to make sure that it wasn't like weird jumping around, that it all worked together to be one neat and conclusive paper with a unifying idea. I just want to take a quick second to show you my works cited page. Again, a lot of this work was done for me because I just copied and pasted these works cited entries from my annotated bibliography straight into my paper. But you'll notice it's just the annotation, there are just the citation. There are none of the annotations here. So it should just show your sources. And you should all have minimal of 4 sources. One of them should be the primary source, which is the story that you analyzed. One of them should be a scholarly peer-reviewed journal article, which for me is the Whitney article. And then 2 of them should be scholarly sources, but they do not have to be peer-reviewed. So this one is from Short Story Criticism, that is not peer-reviewed. And this one is from the Student's Encyclopedia of Great American Writers, also not a peer-reviewed source. But I have met all the requirements. So I highly recommend, before you try to write this paper, you not only read the model paper that I wrote, but also think about how it meets the requirements that are listed on the research paper, and compare what I wrote to the model annotated bibliography you were given to see how much of it you can reuse and to see what kinds of exclusions and revisions I made. You certainly wouldn't want to include work from your annotated bibliography if it's not relevant to what you are arguing in this particular paper. So there might be lines you have to take out or substitutions you might have to make. So just make sure that it feels like one big unified paper as you write. The most important thing is that you are doing thinking as you're creating this project. Think about, how do all these other ideas relate to your interpretation of the story? And to what degree is the story that you chose still relevant in today's day and age? And that's kind of the overarching point of your paper. If at any point you feel confused, unsure, worried that you're not on the right track, don't forget to use your professors as a resource and show us your drafts early so that we can help you finish this as soon as possible. One last thing to note, please be aware of the due dates. Just like in the last paper number 5 for Comp 1, you have an optional due date, which is earlier. If you complete the paper by the optional due date, you will have the chance to revise. If you don't complete the paper by the optional due date, you won't get feedback because you won't be revising. So think about where you stand in the course before you make that decision for yourself. And think about if you're going to really want to, if you've been consistently earning C's in the class, you're probably going to want to leave yourself room to be able to revise this paper as well. If you've been consistently earning A's, you probably don't need that opportunity and you're welcome to take a little bit more time to work on it. Again, if you're in doubt about the smartest choice for you, talk to your professor because we definitely can help you think through that. So that's your paper number 5. I really had a fun time writing this paper and researching this paper. I feel like I learned so much about the story and American culture, and I really enjoyed writing it. And I hope that you enjoy writing your paper too. So right on.